Hello and welcome to the Postal Museum. My name's Georgina and I'm the curator behind our new temporary exhibition, Wish You Were Here, 151 Years of the British Postcard. Today I'm going to take you on a tour around the exhibition and tell you a little bit more about some of our key items on display. The first postcard was introduced in Austria-Hungary back in 1869. The British Post Office introduced their own card the following year in 1870. The card didn't consist of an image, but instead had a pre-printed stamp where the address would appear, and the reverse was left entirely blank for the message. Postcards were introduced as a quick, cheap means of communication and were initially half the price of a letter. During the first year, 75 million postcards travelled through the postal service, and this really only increased with the introduction of images. Pictorial postcards produced by commercial publishers were not accepted by the post office until 1894, and they had to adhere to strict rules. This meant leaving one side of the card entirely blank for the address. The image and the message would appear on the other side, and the publishers would leave small sections around the image for the sender's message. It wasn't until 1902 that we start to see the message and the address appear on the same side of the card. These are known as divided back postcards, where a line would separate the message on one side from the address and the stamp on the other. Postcards, unlike letters, are an open form of communication, so anyone in your household or the postal worker delivering your card would be able to read your message. This led senders to code their messages to keep them private. You could also send secret messages in the stamp. Pictorial postcards produced by commercial publishers, unlike those produced by the post office, required you to purchase your own stamp and affix that to the postcard. The language of stamps meant by angling the stamp in different directions, you could say extra messages like, "I love you" or "Have you forgotten me?"
Now, these are a collection of hand-drawn postcards between 1907 and 1911, and they all depict Harry and Olive's relationship together. So they often show them cycling or going on sort of moonlit trips together. What originally drew me to these images is sort of how beautiful the postcards are. The amount of sort of love and attention that's gone into creating them in the first place is really impressive. But it's not only the images on the postcards that I enjoy, it's the fact that they've been so well preserved. Like, somebody obviously cared really deeply for these cards, like maybe it was Olive, as over 100 years later, here we are looking at them so beautifully preserved for us. What I genuinely love about these pictures is really everything. It's not only the image on the actual card, but it's the content of the cards themselves. So they give us a lovely snapshot of the relationship that Harry and Olive have together. My favourite postcard in the collection is actually Saturday. Now, this card shows a lovely afternoon between the two of them, sort of an afternoon tea, but the content of the actual card is quite funny. It's an apology from Harry to Olive for his pig-headed dullness of Sunday. So I like to think that the card itself is sort of calling back to a happier Saturday between the pair to sort of soften Olive to Harry's apology before she reads his letter. Now, what really inspired me about these images and these cards is that Harry and Olive aren't a famous pair. They're not sort of people whose names that we're definitely going to know. What we really know about them, we know because of the cards in our collection. So they include Olive's full name and her address. This meant that we were able to find them in the census, and that let us know that during this period of time that they were writing to each other, they're actually only living 15 minutes apart. So they must have really cared about each other to really be writing these letters all the time. But we also know that in 1914, Harry and Olive got married. Now, sadly, in 1917, Harry was killed in action in France, cutting their love story short. But we still have this wonderful representation of their relationship, which is something that we really catch a glimpse of throughout the exhibition. Now, a lot of pieces of history often don't give us that type of connection with the past, whereas these show us individuals and their day-to-day lives. Like the Harry and Olive postcards, I think, add a little bit of colour to our idea of the history, of this time, and I really love the story that they tell us.
Postcards, like letters, were really a lifeline for those separated during the First World War. They were an opportunity to write home to friends and loved ones to let them know that you were safe and well. During the First World War, soldiers were given free postage and encouraged to write home as a way of boosting morale. Postcard messages tend to be very short due to the size of the card. However, because soldiers weren't paying for postage, we often see messages that simply read "OK" or "still going strong." During this period, soldiers' postcards were also censored. This was a way of preventing the leak of military positioning to the enemy, but also to prevent those at home from really understanding the real horrors of war. To mitigate this, the field service postcard was introduced. This consisted of pre-printed questions with multiple choice answers the soldier could choose from, thereby removing the risk of information being leaked, but also dictating what the soldier could say. Pictorial postcards of the time also document the progress of the First World War. Postcards were used as propaganda, not only to show victorious soldiers and the strength of the armed forces, but also the immorality of the enemy and the destruction they were causing. For many of us, we associate postcards with going on holiday. They're a chance to write home to loved ones and friends and really let them know what a great time you're having and perhaps incite a touch of jealousy. With the expansion of the Victorian Rail network and later the Holiday Pay Act, more and more people were able to go on holiday and access the British seaside. Seaside postcards often depict quintessential British images like donkeys or deck chairs. They also tend to show the seaside in the best of weather, which is not always the experience of every holiday goer. For this show, we've been lucky enough to borrow material from the Bamforth and Company archive. Bamforth produced postcards for much of the 20th century and also contributed to the trend of saucy seaside postcards. These postcards speak of the humour of a bygone age, with exaggerated body forms and objectified images of women. By depicting these characters as caricatures, these rude scenarios and questionable innuendos were made more acceptable to people at the time. Due to the questionable morality of these cards, censorship boards were set up across the country to pass personal judgment on what was deemed acceptable. Bamforth and Company sent their sketches to the Blackpool Censorship Board, where if deemed appropriate, these could be printed and sold around the country.
So I've selected this saucy seaside postcard as one of thousands which were produced in the post-war period. This was a time of great celebration of the summer holiday. Everybody was getting away to the sun, whether it was for a day trip or a whole week in a hotel. What you see here are 5 people lined up together on the sand, and they've each got placards with very prominent slogans, and each one begins with the word "no," which sounds very negative until you actually read what they say. No office routine, no work this week, no washing or ironing, no bus to catch, no blaring alarm clock. So they're all actually positives. And what I find fun about this, in relation to what we've experienced in the last year, is that these are all very relevant slogans to working from home, except perhaps the central one, no washing or ironing. Looking at the art in a bit more detail, you can see this is the work of a man called Arnold Taylor, who was an in-house artist of the production company that made these postcards, which was called Bamforth. And they were based in a very grey industrial old building up in the Yorkshire town of Holmforth. Mr. James Bamforth, the originator of the company, was a photographer of the Victorian era, when portrait photography was very much in vogue. But here was his company devoting itself to something kind of mundane, the printed postcard, but very, very colourfully, As you can see, the artist does not hold back in terms of his use of primary and very bold colours, and he's really bringing a lot of sun into the image. You can see the backs of these holiday makers are very much sunlit, and interestingly, they're looking into a yellow sky of all things, not what one might expect at the seaside.
The height of postcard sending took place in the early 1900s, with over 900 million postcards travelling through the postal service in 1 year. Many of these cards were added to Edwardian postcard albums, with individuals amassing numbers in their thousands. For a contemporary audience, these postcards now offer a window into the past, not only through the images depicted, but also the messages of the senders. Postcards can be purchased at postcard fairs around the country, as well as flea markets and online auction sites, really giving these cards a second lease of life. To understand collecting from a collector's point of view, we've been lucky enough to work with artist and writer Guy Atkins, who has curated a display of their own collection. These postcards of Parliament Square document the changing landscape, not only as a site of political change, but also that of protest. Postcards also act as souvenirs of an experience. Museums and attractions across the country sell postcards in their gift shops. These tend to be cheap and portable options for tourists. Museums often reproduce many of their famous paintings as postcards, allowing the visitor to take home their own masterpiece. In comparison to the height of postcard sending in the early 1900s, it's estimated that numbers have reduced by up to 80%, of which many factors may have played a part. At its inception, the postcard was half the price of a letter. This cheaper cost was removed in 1968 with the introduction of the first and second class system, meaning a postcard cost the same to send as a letter. Cheaper air travel may have also played a part, with many more people being able to travel to further afield destinations or travelling for shorter periods, where the sender may return home before the postcard is even delivered. Technological advances have also played a part in the decline of the postcard. The postcard could be classed as a precursor to direct messaging systems like WhatsApp, with the ability to send an image and a message together. Ever-increasing forms of digital communication have and will continue to surpass traditional communication, not only in speed but brevity. The postcard, however, is adapting to new audiences. Organisations like Post Crossing are also encouraging postcard sending, but in a more traditional means. Their website is used to connect strangers across the world and also gamifies the act of sending postcards with leaderboards for those who have sent the most cards. These companies help to sustain the postcard as a means of communication by amalgamating the process with contemporary technology. Postcards are not only a form of communication, but they can also be used to inspire art. The organisation Art on a Postcard raises money for the Hepatitis C Trust by holding secret auctions of postcard-size artwork and selling limited edition postcard prints on their website. By making this artwork at postcard size, it becomes more affordable for a greater number of people. Postcards can also inspire original artwork. Emily May produced watercolours of pictorial postcards, not only focusing on the images of the postcard, but also the handwritten message and the design of the stamp. These designs were then manipulated into a digital repeat pattern and, in collaboration with designer Coco Fennell, crafted into a dress. Postcards also have the ability to be the canvas for artwork. Francesca Calusi-Kramer embroiders directly into the postcards, bringing colour to black and white images as well as texture and abstract shapes. It's interesting to look at the reverse of the card to see how the older message has been disturbed by the embroidery thread. This alters the function of the card. It is no longer a form of communication, but instead a piece of artwork. For many, 2020 was a difficult year, where communication was extremely important in a time when we couldn't physically be together. The artist Nathan Huxtable created the Daily Postcard project during the first lockdown. With the help of social media, he sent hand-painted postcards to people around the world. These were greatly received, with many people retweeting images of the cards with messages of thanks, showing the importance of communication at this time. Postcards have also been used as a way of continuing the work of theatres. The touring theatre company New Perspectives used postcards as a way of bringing drama into people's homes, told in 6 parts through postcard messages. Postcard design is also adapted, looking at what we're now coining the new normal, with images of lockdown birthdays and staycations. As we look at how the postcard is being used today, it starts to make us question what the future of these two-dimensional cards is. It will be interesting to see whether the postcard, much like vinyl, could have a revival, where people shun colder forms of communication and look to more personal, emotive correspondence. For this exhibition, we've been lucky enough to work with contemporary artist Peter LIVERSIDGE, who's produced 4 unique postcards for our visitors. Peter's art works in collaboration with the Postal Service. By sending items unpackaged through the post, it's really the Postal Service which dictates what items make it to their final destination and in what condition. Peter also produces text-based artwork in the form of proposals. These statements encourage the audience to take part in an action or a thought. The postcards that we've produced for this show really combine both aspects of Peter's work and include proposals that look at the importance of communication. By producing these proposals on postcards, the owner really plays a part in what the future of the card is. With these cards, we'd like our audience to think about what to do with them, whether to send them to a loved one, keep them as a souvenir of the experience, or perhaps even a piece of art. By contemplating this decision, we hope our audience will engage in the debate around what the future for the postcard might be. Thank you for joining us on this tour of our new temporary exhibition. We really hope you can visit the museum soon, and if you're interested in learning more about postcards, do visit our website. If you've enjoyed this tour, please do consider donating. Your support helps us to preserve and care for these items and continue to tell their fascinating stories.